Welcome to the Phoenix Prosperity Podcast, where wealth meets legacy. Join your host, Tim Fergestad, as we explore the journeys of Phoenix's finest to success and beyond.
Hello, this is Tim Fergestad. Thank you for joining us. I'm very pleased to have Chris Zambakari with me here today. Dr. Christopher Zambakari is a multifaceted expert in senior healthcare, international security, and sustainable development. With a diverse educational background, including a doctorate in law and policy, he brings a unique perspective to his work. He's the founder and CEO of the Zambakari Advisory and Promised Land Healthcare Group and provides evidence-based analysis of global political events. In Arizona, he leads 4 senior healthcare facilities, demonstrating his commitment to elderly care. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So why don't you give us a snapshot of all that, all your current sort of businesses and your focus right now?
Well, I always tell people that I run on 2 different tracks. And these are 2 of my passions. On the one hand, I have the consulting firm that produces a lot of research primarily, and it packages, I guess you call them technical solutions on issues of security and peace and development, and increasingly also healthcare. And then I have, on the other hand, my healthcare entities. And these are residential care facilities spread out basically throughout the state of Arizona, starting from Phoenix, spreading all the way up to Prescott Valley. And those are mainly service focused, and they are 24/7 residential care homes for elderly folks, and in particular those with memory care needs. That's been very much our lane for the last decade.
Okay. Excellent. So, talk a little bit about how your background led to that, if you don't mind, because you have quite a background.
I was resettled in Phoenix, me, my sisters, and my mother, as refugees, interesting enough, from the then Sudan. Right? Sudan used to be a single country, and when the country split into 2, so by de facto that made me South Sudanese, by the refugee from South Sudan. And that was almost 20 years ago. And so we came in knowing very little, and I went to high school. And my mom worked in the hotel business, service sector. And then she then heard about caregiving. So she went to Phoenix College and got her caregiver certificate. And then for the last 12, 13 years, she worked as a caregiver. And then when I was in New York pursuing my MBA, she had a stroke. So for 2 years, she couldn't work. And then I went from New York to Boston, got a doctorate, and then I came back to Phoenix. And when I came back, I said, well, what could we do? Right? You always have to start where you are with what you got. And I said, well, how about we look at caregiving and we set something up that will basically tailor and sort of pull in her skill set. And so we started, I think about it now in hindsight, I'm like, there are many ways I could have gone about this, but I jumped in. I told myself, you have an MBA, you have a doctorate, you can get this done. And so we started with a 5-bed residential care facility in Central Phoenix. And that maybe took about 2 years of just massive amount of work and investment before I was able to stabilize it, because partly I had no mentor. I didn't know what I was doing, and I was just going off of what I could research and do.
Okay.
And that's the birth of the healthcare facilities. But then when I came back from New York, I first tried to get a job. I couldn't get a job here in Phoenix. And with a degree in international relations and MBA in finance, I really struggled to find something. So a friend of mine said, hey, have you looked at the Rotary? And I said, Rotary? I never heard. So I began calling, and I called probably about a dozen clubs. And one club in Sun City answered the phone and they said, hey, why don't you come over and we'll get to know you? And so I went to Sun City West, and they said, yes. By the way, the deadline for submission for the research fellow is almost near, but we can speed things up and get you sponsored. They literally called the foundation in Illinois and had a pause. And they said, we have somebody that is really sharp. We're going to sponsor him. We're going to get a district, get everything done. And lo and behold, I got nominated, and I got selected to be a Rotary Peace Scholar. And I was sent to Australia for 15 months. And then I came back. And what I saw there and what I saw when I was doing my applied field experience in Germany basically convinced me that there are better ways to do international affairs. specifically working in the peace sector, transitional processes and countries that are coming out of conflict, because that was my portfolio. That's what I was mainly focused on. I said there are better ways to do it than what we see on TV, right? I'm talking about Syria, Iraq, South Sudan. We're talking about Lebanon, Yemen, all the major issues that you see today in the news. Those are part of the portfolio that I was working on. I came back and I said, I think I can do better. I think I can assemble a team of experts, and then I think we can do better. And that was the birth of the Zambakari Advisory. And now we're sort of scattered around the world. I'm the only one with my statistical team that is based in Phoenix, but everybody else is sort of like in different part of the world. And depending on what is needed, I usually can put that team together and assign them the task. So 2 different tracks.
Okay. Yeah. And let's skip back and forth between them until we merge them, if you don't mind. Okay. So how did you start up? So a lot of people, it's a special person to be a caregiver. It takes a special person to do that. And how has that been for your mom in terms of running multiple facilities, right? You have to staff those and run them. And how's that been? That was basically your first business venture? Is that right?
Yes. This was the first. I mean, the Phoenix location was really the first. And then we began expanding from there outward. And so now my mom is really involved in training mainly caregivers. When we get new caregivers,
she embraced the added responsibilities that takes when you start running the show instead of just being a care provider.
Yes, in fact, she said I'm going to do a little bit less because she had some other healthcare problems that required that she do less intensive work. But I've kept her on mainly because she's an amazing caregiver, like one of the best. And when we hire new caregivers, I usually will have them go through her training because I basically want to reproduce that level of competency. You know, when you take care of somebody's mom, you want to make sure that they get the very best.
Yes. Okay, so to my knowledge, here in Arizona, for our listeners who may not know, sounds like you're doing assisted living care homes here in Phoenix with sort of a focus on memory care. And in Arizona, there's Florida and Arizona are sort of the two bigger markets for elderly care homes. And of them, I'd say about 20% of them are the residential model. 80% are sort of the big box, 100 beds or more. And a lot of people, when they've spent their whole life in a house, they like to stay in a house. They don't want to feel like they're moving into a hotel with long hallways and stuff and cafeterias. And also, I'd say one of the benefits of the residential model is also the caregiver ratio is generally much better. And so that's a big deal, right? If somebody needs help, they don't want to have to sit for 2 hours or something before somebody can get around to helping them. So I think it's a great service, and I hope it's going well for you. How did that grow for you? You would start with a 5-bed, and then you have to, like I said, you have to find caregivers and staff it, and then you have to manage it. And I believe somebody has to sign on as a manager. Did you ever get licensed in that capacity?
Yes, for the first 3 years, I actually just hire managers to run these facilities, but also you're only allowed to manage as a manager 2 of them at a time. It used to be you could have more, but then as the regulations started evolved, they basically said, you have to be within a certain geographic area with a certain distance of these facilities. Right. Because otherwise, somebody could be like living in Flagstaff and managing a facility here in Phoenix. If there's a real emergency, there's no way you're going to get here within the hour.
Sure.
So, and then I think about 2 years ago, I went through the training and I basically became a manager. So out of the 4, the fourth one is forthcoming, but out of the 3, I managed it 2, and then I have another manager that manages the 3rd.
Okay. And is it hard to have the one, you said you have one in Prescott Valley, or is that the new one you're setting up?
Yeah, so the 3rd one is in Prescott Valley. The 4th one should be up and running probably early January. It's also in Prescott Valley. And there are reasons behind that. And also behind this expansion, they are not random. Because if you look at the model of a 5-bed, in fact, most people that do the residential care facility, they start with the 5-bed because the startup capital is low, the threshold is low. 10-bed requires sprinkler systems, for example, that costs a lot. And when you're just starting out, you don't have that kind of capital. You don't have the money to put into a sprinkler system. And that goes for any that is 6-bed or above. And then it stops at 10. And then when you go above 10, that's a whole different class of entities. So most people, the easiest thing to do is usually to go 5-bed because you can retrofit your own home into a care facility. In fact, I've known people that they basically took their house and licensed it as a care home. They live in it and they're taking care of people.
Right. I think that was sort of the original.
Yeah. That is
how they started. It was kind of sort of mom and pops.
Yeah. That's the entry level. And it has advantages, a lot of financial advantages of starting there. But once you run them for a little bit, you notice that the margin is also very small, right? Mm-hmm. You can only have 5-bed. And, if you lose one client, then it essentially puts you in the red. And you have to be around the entity basically 24/7. And so hence comes the model of the 10-bed, because then the 10-bed, you can easily double your profit margin. And then now you can have professional staff that operate the facility and you don't have to live there physically. And I think there's a fair number of those, the 10-beds throughout Arizona. Like in Prescott, I think there's only one facility in the whole area that is a 5-bed. But that tells you the margin is so small that most people cannot survive on that margin alone.
Right. Okay. So I want to get these two rails to connect. So let's go back to your some more diplomatic sort of work. So how did that sort of consulting continue on after, I guess, Australia and Germany?
So I guess what I saw in Germany, because my job, so I was embedded with the German Foundation, one of the largest German foundations in Europe. And they were looking at transitional processes and mediation, like in Africa, in the Middle East, in Eurasia, in South America. Colombia, for example, the Colombia peace process was ongoing, and it was part of the mediation track that we were working on. And my job was to basically think through some of these transitional processes and to come up with recommendation for the foundation. And so, I went into meetings with the German Foreign Ministry. So I was kind of like the fly on the wall, trying to understand what was happening in these countries, conduct background research, and then provide a recommendation on how the foundation could approach some of these mediation processes. And I noticed that at the high level, when you're talking about a country that is very complex, and then you're coming in from sort of like a top-down model, and you're saying, these are the major issues, and these are the players, and this is how you should go about it, they tend to be very unsustainable in long term, because a lot of politics, they say all politics is local. And if you don't understand the local level development, a lot of time the big picture stuff they're not sustainable. And so when I came back, I thought myself, well, I can do this research. I have a certification in mediation in Australia. And so I've seen a lot of these big picture processes, and I've seen the shortcomings of them, right? So you see a country that goes through a peace agreement, and then less than 3 years later, it explodes. Like, what happened? And I figured the best way for me to offer any value was to work with people that were locally grounded, people that were locally there, and working with the local communities to try to understand and come up with local solutions to some of these problems, while simultaneously doing some of the big picture research and statistical analysis of some of these processes, and then offering solutions, especially to businesses, for example, that are doing business in some of these conflict-prone countries. Because it doesn't matter how volatile a country is, you're going to find businesses that are still doing business there, right? There are companies that want to go overseas. There are companies that want to go into new markets. And so I figured one of the things I could do was to try to help these companies also do business in this global marketplace, and to understand them. Because if you don't really understand, then you overinvest in an area, and then it goes boom, then you lose everything. So it was kind of sort of two-pronged. I have a lot of faith in businesses, because I think if you have a good flourishing private sector, a lot of time you can do a lot of public good. And so I was coming from sort of that MBA finance background, where how do you work with small businesses in some of these tough marketplaces around the world?
Right.
And also, because I'm a researcher, you've got to understand them. And so it was sort of that confluence between understanding the complex marketplace and then tailoring solutions for businesses that were interested in doing business in those countries. And we began with Africa primarily, and then it was the Middle East, and then it was a bit of South America, and then we sort of work our way out there because Africa has always been, because I'm from there, I had a much better grip on the countries and the landscape.
Okay. So, what? Tell me a little bit about what sets you apart in not the healthcare space, but in the security, international security, sustainable development space.
For one, I have access to like topical experts, like absolutely the very best of the best, in all over 30 countries. And these are people that live in these areas, that understand this context, and that can usually provide advising, recommendations, that can do research, that can craft strategies for companies that do not have the manpower in those areas to understand them. So I have people that are embedded in this different zone of operations. And then you have the statistical team that is based here in Phoenix. So we're able to collect data. And that was the other thing we were able to do, which was we're able to triangulate, vast number of databases, both political, economic, social, because I wanted to understand all the moving pieces. Because if someone came to you and say, hey, do you think it'd be worthwhile of energy to invest in this country? Then I was able to look at it and look at all our databases, run these numbers and say, well, the trend is that this country is going to be likely in the next 2-3 years, very volatile because a lot of the moving pieces are already falling apart. And so I was able to rely a lot on publicly available data and privately available data and data that we collected ourselves.
Right. Okay.
And that's something that comes from my background because that when I was in grad school, I literally collected data in South Sudan to do my dissertation, my doctoral dissertation. So, and that's where that idea came from, which is to have data-driven, tailored solutions for basically a complex world.
Okay. And then talk about bring these two together now and tell me about how those skill sets sort of help you in the healthcare field.
Oh, that's easy. In fact, you have to go back to 2019. In 2019, one of our flagship publications is, we call them special issues, and they're basically thematic and they're regional in scope. We were working on sort of like infectious disease. So for the special issue, and I've been noticing that in China, you had this virus that was kind of spreading, and the Chinese were trying to decode it, to figure out what it was and how contagious it was. That was like 2019. And then at the time, I was already owner-operator of 2 of the care facilities in the Valley. And so I told my team, I said, so first I looked at how many flights connect China to the mainland United States. And when I looked at those numbers, I said, oh my God, this problem may seem like it's there, but in a short period of time, it's going to be here. And so I began developing policies and procedure for the care facilities because I anticipated we were going to have essentially a pandemic. And so I wrote up all the policies, so much so and so in advance that when the healthcare department figured out what was happening and they began pushing out requirements for social distancing and all of that, I already had those measures in place because I had figured out through the research earlier that potentially there was a pandemic in the making and that it was just a matter of time before it got here. So I ended up basically scaling up the research dramatically, and then we produced, in the same year, we produced 2 different special issues. Normally we only produce 1, but we produced 1 right in the middle of the pandemic, looking at like the broad contours of that pandemic and what healthcare providers were supposed to do in order to first understand it and to try to put preventive measures in place to save lives. And then because we were in the pandemic the following year, I did a follow-up, and then I put together another team of healthcare experts from around the world. And then we produced another, I think it was like 12, 13 chapter compilation of studies, very much the latest studies at the time on what was happening around the world, with the intent of providing free access to this research so that people could read them and try to put in place measures that could save lives. So that was the thing. And also most of this research was like, they're open. I never charged for them. They were easily accessible because it was something that mattered to me from day one, which was to try to reach a broader readership and not to try to monetize the research per se, because if someone had to pay you money to access the research that potentially could save lives, there was no point to that.
Okay.
So in a nutshell, the two came together, and then we managed to start producing research ever since after that point for the healthcare facilities.
Okay. And for our listeners and watchers who may not know, COVID did hit a few geographical places in the senior communities harder. And here in Phoenix, for example, there were a couple of facilities that had a hard time. But for the most part, particularly the smaller residential places actually fared really well because of their systems, as well as their smaller networks. I think they're easier to contain and control.
Actually, you're absolutely right. In fact, right when we were working on getting some of the data that we use for the special issue, I was looking at the death rates and the infection rate, because the health department here, AZDHS, had a dashboard where they had a dashboard that basically was giving you in real time so infections rate and death rate, and it was telling you exactly where they were occurring. And then Johns Hopkins had the other one. So we were able to use both of those databases to try to make sense of the global scale of the phenomena. But I remember early on, at one point, 50% of the death was occurring in nursing homes, which makes sense if you think about it, because this is aggregate settings. These are places where you have a lot of people in smaller settings. And then you have the issue of how do you equip the staff to make sure that this disease doesn't spread to people that are already very vulnerable, right? So with smaller facilities, smaller staff, smaller population, they were able to do much better than the larger establishment. If you look at what happened in Washington, like at the very early onset, the larger facility, they were really suffering. Also, we didn't have access to testing capabilities, so you really didn't know what to do or how to know if you had an infection in the community. So knowing what was happening, I filed with the health department and the Human Services office and got us testing capabilities early on. So we were able to test residents, staff, families, neighbors, colleagues. We're testing everybody that wanted testing because we had really access to the testing capabilities early on.
Right. Yeah. Some of those early variants were some of the toughest for sure, particularly on the elderly community.
But it makes sense, right? If you think about it, you have a population that is already vulnerable, whose comorbidity is in the plurality. Those should have been the first people should have been sort of protected. But then we went out and we overreacted and we tried to protect everybody. But no, we did not have equal risk, right? A healthy person probably did just fine. But somebody that was diabetic, that had cardiovascular problems, that was obese, that had all these other markers, they were susceptible to huge consequences from COVID.
Right.
So this should have been our primary focus, but really because we didn't really understand, we went out here and then over time we figured out, okay, maybe you can go out to work, maybe you can, stay away from other people and so forth and so forth. But it was gradual. So, but yeah, it was a huge learning curve, but I'm glad that we were in that space because honestly, it saved a lot of lives. And for the first 2 years, we had no COVID in the care homes. First 2 years.
Yeah. Excellent. I like to ask people what some of the bigger challenges are in their career in companies. I think that's probably one of yours that you probably had.
No, but it was I came in 2001 to the United States, and even with 9/11, I don't remember us experiencing anything on that scale. Honestly, I lived in war zones. I've lived in multiple war zones, and I've seen really the up and the low. But I think for the United States, honestly, I cannot even think of any other episode that we had that was similar to the 2 years of COVID. Maybe the Vietnam War. Honestly, it was something that is really out of the ordinary, and I just hope that the lessons were learned, and should something like this repeat, we're better informed, better prepared for that, because it seemed that it caught everybody by surprise.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. I'm talking a little bit on the prosperity side of the show. I sometimes like to ask people what their best and worst investments are. Do they have real estate in their portfolio yet and stuff? And you have several real estate homes. That's a big part of the owning a care home and running a care home. Maybe can you talk about maybe some of the pain points with some of your investments or companies?
So, again, it's for someone that is listening to this. I don't want to sound like, you just wake up one day and then there you are, because there was a sort of a gradual evolution to them. Like I said, so when you start off and you're more likely either you have a mortgage that is your own home that you retrofit into a business, or you're renting, right? For most people, they're renting a home to use as a business. But when you spend a lot of time in this industry, you realize really the thing that has the most value is the real estate itself, right? And so the quicker you can get to that real estate, that entity, the better off you're going to be, because suddenly you're both the business and you're also the landlord, and you own both of those assets. So that down the line, when you decide to sell, you can just sell the business, keep the real estate, sell the real estate, keep the business, or sell the two at the same time, or lease them out. So it took me 5 years before I had, and talk about the question of challenges, access to capital, huge barrier.
Okay.
Right off the bat, huge barrier. There's the knowledge, but if you have the knowledge, you don't have access to capital, it's still a very steep climb. So
right.
After 5 years, I was able to, through a mentor, a SCORE mentor, who told me about the SBA loans, and that was my first acquisition. And I was able to buy the real estate from the person that was renting it to me, because I had the business, and once we added the real estate, it was complete.
Okay. That reminds me a little bit of the founder. Have you ever about Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's? Have you seen that movie?
Oh yes. In fact, my wife and I were discussing it, and she was telling me, McDonald's not just the burgers. She was like, it's the real estate.
Yeah.
The light went off. I'm like, really? Most people don't even put the two together.
He could make it work until the one guy told him, "You're in the real estate business. This is right."
But it is, and the same logic applies to residential care facilities, big or small.
Okay. Well, and you're doing real estate investing, but you're having a great impact, and you're changing lives. You're serving people, making a big difference in the valley. That's awesome. Thank you.
If you can do and work in the space of your calling, and then you can change lives and make money at the same time, I think that's one of the best things you can do. Because you can make money and not really change lives.
Yeah.
And you can change lives and not make money.
Right. Yep. For sure.
Too.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Chris, what do you wish you knew sooner in your journey?
Oh my God. I think having good mentors is absolutely invaluable if you think about it.
Okay.
Because a lot of time you could save yourself a lot of heartache if you can have good, competent mentors that can point you in the direction. They don't have to do the work. They just point you in the direction, say, don't do that. Think about it this way. Go over there. Talk to so-and-so. And this mentor oftentimes will also bring you into contact with people that are good lenders. And because at the end of the day, if you're going to be borrowing money to get real estate or to buy a business, you need to find somebody that is not going to take you for a spin. And I never forgot, the banker that did my first SBA loan, he said, we believe in your vision more than anything else. And because we believe in that vision and we trust you,
right,
we're gonna get the deal done for you. And the rest of it is history. So good mentorship, I think, is invaluable. Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter how successful you are, having access to good mentors, good friends in the banking sector, investment sector, lenders, is invaluable, because a lot of time when you start off, you're not going to have that network unless you're born rich or you've inherited a lot of money. You're just not going to have access to it. And if you're like me, you're somebody that climbed the academic ladder all the way up. Academics doesn't really teach you that either, right? It teaches you other things, but it doesn't teach you this. And so today I mentor a lot of people. I'm willing and freely able to share the pitfalls with a lot of people. I put a lot of people in touch with people that can help them. And I feel like because I have the knowledge, I can share it.
Okay.
And
excellent.
I didn't have that when I started off. And part of the reason why it took me a long time to get to where I am is primarily also I did not have that kind of support or mentorship.
Right. Okay. Great answer. And if people would like to connect with you and learn more about you, what should they do?
I have they can just Google my first and last name. That's probably the easiest thing because it will bring you all of my entities. They will pop up. You can just put the Zambakari advisory. That's also me. You can also do Desert Haven, which are the care homes. That's also me. I can share my email. The contact information is on there. If you tap my first and last name, you have my contact information. That's probably the easiest way to do it. I get calls like Texas. People call me like, my mom is stuck, at home. I don't know what to do. She has dementia. And believe it or not, I'm able to pull the strings and get that person help, even though I'm in Arizona, they're in Texas.
Right. Excellent. Yeah, knowing how the systems work in different places can and I'm sure your network grows and grows.
And also, you think because we have a lot of this information, that's why we started publishing, because I realized that a lot of the families, it was really good resource for them to know some of the basic things about how to pick care facilities and what dementia is, the different types and those things. And I basically tested it out. It was so successful that people were writing to me and they're saying, I saw your article on dementia and I have some questions. People call me, they come from San Francisco, they have questions. Our work gets cited by magazines and newspapers around the world. And so I feel like God gave me that God blessed me. And then it's my way to bless other people with the gift and talent that I have. And I think it goes full circle.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening and for watching. Thank you very much, Christopher Zambakari, for joining me today. Very much appreciate you sharing your story and insights into success and caring, really, and having an impact in Phoenix. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Inspired by our guests? Visit phoenixprosperitypodcast.com/guest and join us on the show and share your success story with Tim. The spotlight awaits.